The parking lot went dead silent. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace, the kind that comes right before something breaks. Margaret Hale stood beside her car, one hand still resting on the trunk, her white nurse's scrubs catching the last of the October sun. She wasn't moving, wasn't arguing, just standing there. Across from her, Officer Ryan Dutch had his hand hovering near his belt, not on his radio, not relaxed, on his cuffs, like she was dangerous. Around them, phones came up. Someone whispered, "Is he seriously?" Another voice hissed, "She's got to be like 60. A woman in scrubs near the hospital entrance stood frozen, keys dangling from her hand. Margaret's face stayed calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes from seeing worse. "Ma'am," Dutch said again, louder now, "step away from the vehicle." She didn't. "You're making a serious mistake," she said quietly. He reached for her arm, and she let him. If you want to see how far a person can be pushed before the whole system cracks wide open, stay with me until the end. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let's go." Margaret had been loading medical kits into her trunk for the better part of 10 minutes when the patrol car rolled up. She didn't notice it at first. Her back was to the lot, and her mind was elsewhere. Crestview Medical Center had been short-staffed for 2 months straight, and tonight's swing shift had been brutal. 3 codes, 1 combative patient, and a family screaming at her because their father's morphine drip wasn't instant relief. She was tired, bone tired, the kind of tired that makes you move on autopilot. She set the last kit down beside the spare tire, straightened up, and that's when she saw him. A Hartfield City patrol car, engine idling, parked 2 spaces over. The officer inside wasn't looking at his computer. He was looking at her. Margaret frowned, brushed a strand of gray-white hair out of her face, and went back to organizing the trunk. Probably nothing. Cops sat in hospital lots all the time, waiting for incident reports, grabbing coffee, killing time between calls. But then the door opened. She heard boots on asphalt. "Afternoon, ma'am." She turned. The officer was younger than she'd expected. Early 30s, maybe. Buzz cut, sharp jaw, the kind of build that said he spent more time at the gym than behind a desk. His nameplate read Dutch. His expression was unreadable, but his posture wasn't. Shoulders back, chin up, authority dialed to maximum. "Afternoon," Margaret replied evenly. "Mind telling me what you're doing?" She blinked. "Loading my car. I can see that." Dutch took a step closer, eyes flicking to the medical kits. "What's in the bags?" "Supplies. I'm a nurse." "From inside?" "Yes." "You work here?" Margaret's frown deepened. "I've worked here for 6 years." Dutch didn't respond right away. He just looked at her, slowly, deliberately, like he was cataloging every detail. The scrubs, the orthopedic shoes, the hospital badge clipped to her collar that clearly read, "Margaret Hale, RN." "You got ID?" he asked. "I just showed you my badge." "I need a driver's license." Margaret's hand stilled. Something in his tone had shifted. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a test. She kept her voice calm. "Can I ask why?" "Ma'am, I'm not going to ask again." "I'm not refusing," she said quietly. "I'm asking for clarification. What's the legal reason for the stop?" Dutch's jaw tightened. "Suspicious activity. Loading my own car? That's what we're determining." Margaret held his gaze for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out her wallet. She handed over her license without a word. Dutch took it, barely glanced at it, and held on to it. "Step away from the vehicle, please." "Excuse me?" "I said step away." Margaret didn't move. "Officer, I've complied with your request. I'd like my license back." "You'll get it back when I'm done." "Done with what?" "Conducting my investigation." "Into what?" His expression hardened. "Ma'am, you're being difficult." "No," Margaret said quietly. "I'm being lawful." Around them, the parking lot had gone still. A handful of people had stopped to watch, staff heading to their cars, a couple near the main entrance, someone in scrubs holding a to-go cup from the cafeteria. Phones were coming out now. Margaret saw at least 3 people recording. Dutch saw them too. His shoulders stiffened. "Turn around," he said. "What?" Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Margaret's heart kicked once, hard, but her face didn't change. You're arresting me? You're being detained for obstruction. I haven't obstructed anything. You refused a lawful order. I asked a question. Dutch stepped forward, hand moving to his belt, not for his gun, but for his cuffs. Last chance, hands behind your back. Margaret glanced past him, just for a second, and caught the eye of a woman in scrubs near the entrance. The woman's mouth was open, frozen, mid-breath. Margaret gave her the smallest nod. Then she looked back at Dutch. I'm cooperating, she said evenly. State your legal reason. He grabbed her wrist. The metal snapped cold around her right hand, then her left. Margaret didn't resist. She didn't pull away. She just let him do it, her expression flat and unreadable. Someone in the crowd gasped. Jesus Christ, a man muttered. Dutch gripped her shoulder and started steering her toward the patrol car. Margaret moved without fighting, her steps measured and deliberate. As they passed a young guy in a hoodie holding up his phone, she spoke. Not loud, but clear. Keep recording. Dutch's hand tightened on her shoulder, but he didn't say anything. He opened the back door of the cruiser and guided her inside. Margaret sat down without protest, her cuffed hands resting awkwardly against the seat. The door slammed shut, and for a moment everything was quiet. Margaret sat in the back of the patrol car and focused on her breathing. In, out, steady. It was a trick she'd learned a long time ago, in a place much worse than a Hartfield City parking lot. A place where staying calm wasn't optional. It was survival. Through the window, she could see Dutch talking to another officer who'd just arrived. The second cop was older, gray at the temples, and his expression was tight. He kept glancing at the crowd, then back at Dutch, shaking his head slightly. Margaret couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could read the body language well enough. The older cop wasn't happy. After a few minutes, Dutch walked back to the cruiser, got in the driver's seat, and pulled out of the lot without a word. Margaret watched the hospital shrink in the rearview mirror. Charles. The Hartfield police station was a squat brick building downtown, wedged between a bail bonds office and a check cashing place. Inside, it smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Dutch led her through a side door, past a handful of officers who glanced up from their desks with mild curiosity, and into a small processing room. Sit, he said, pointing to a metal chair bolted to the floor. Margaret sat. Dutch pulled out a form, clicked his pen, and started filling it out in silence. Margaret waited. She was good at waiting. After a minute, he looked up. You got anyone you want to call? Not yet. Suit yourself. He went back to the form. Margaret's wrists ached where the cuffs had been. They'd taken them off when she got inside, but the pressure had left faint red marks on her skin. She rubbed them absently, her mind running through a mental checklist. She hadn't been read her rights. She hadn't been charged. She'd been detained for obstruction, but Dutch hadn't explained what she'd obstructed or cited a specific statute. Sloppy. The door opened and a woman in a sergeant's uniform stepped in. She was black, mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. Her nameplate read Ortiz. Dutch, she said flatly, outside. Dutch stood, shot Margaret a look, and followed Ortiz into the hallway. The door didn't close all the way. Margaret could hear fragments of the conversation. The hell were you thinking? Suspicious behavior. A nurse, Ryan, she's a goddamn nurse, didn't comply because you didn't give her a reason to. The voices dropped lower, but the tension didn't. Margaret sat still, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. When the door opened again, it wasn't Dutch who walked in. It was Ortiz. She pulled out the chair across from Margaret and sat down with a long exhale. Miss Hale. Sergeant? Ortiz rubbed her temples. I'm going to be straight with you. Officer Dutch made a mistake. Margaret didn't respond. He should have explained the reason for the stop more clearly. He should have de-escalated instead of detaining you. Ortiz leaned forward slightly. I'm sorry. Are you releasing me? Yes. We're processing you out now. Margaret nodded once. I want a copy of the incident report. Ortiz hesitated. You'll get one. When? Within 48 hours. I want it in writing. Ortiz studied her for a moment, then pulled out a notepad, scribbled something, and slid it across the table. "You'll have it by Monday." Margaret picked up the note, folded it, and tucked it into her pocket. "Thank you." Ortiz stood. "For what it's worth, this shouldn't have happened." "No," Margaret said quietly. "It shouldn't have." They returned her belongings in a sealed plastic bag: wallet, keys, phone, and a small silver lighter she'd carried since her deployment days. She didn't smoke anymore, but she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. As she signed the release form, she noticed something. The officer processing her out, a younger guy, early 20s, kept glancing at her wallet where it lay on the counter, not at the license, at something behind it. Margaret saw his eyes widen slightly. He looked up at her, then quickly back down. She didn't say anything, just finished signing, took her things, and walked out. Outside, the late afternoon had cooled into early evening. Margaret stood on the station steps for a moment, breathing in the autumn air, and pulled out her phone. 17 missed calls, 12 texts, most of them from the hospital, a few from coworkers, one from her daughter in Portland. She ignored all of them and opened her camera roll. Before Dutch had put her in the car, the guy in the hoodie had airdropped her the video he'd filmed. Margaret had accepted it without Dutch noticing. She played it now. The footage was shaky but clear. Dutch approaching, the conversation, her calm responses, his escalation, the cuffs, and her voice, steady and quiet. "Keep recording." Margaret saved the video to 3 separate cloud backups. Then she called her daughter. Vanessa picked up on the first ring. "Mom, what the hell? I've been calling you for 2 hours." "I'm fine." "You were arrested?" "Detained." "It's different." Mom, are you serious right now?" Margaret leaned against the railing, suddenly exhausted. "I'm okay, Nessa. I promise." "Where are you?" "Outside the station. They let me go." There was a pause. Then Vanessa's voice dropped, tight and low. "Tell me you got a lawyer." "Not yet." "Mom, I will. I just needed a minute." Vanessa exhaled sharply. Okay. Do you need me to come down? I can get a flight tonight." "No, stay with the kids. I'll handle it." "You shouldn't have to handle it alone." Margaret closed her eyes. "I'm not alone." Another pause. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" "Yeah," Margaret said softly. "I'm sure." They talked for a few more minutes, Vanessa pushing, Margaret deflecting, until finally, reluctantly, Vanessa let it go. When Margaret hung up, the sun had dropped below the skyline, painting the clouds in shades of rust and violet. She stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled down to a name she hadn't called in years. Bridger, Lieutenant Colonel Sam. Her thumb hovered over the number. Not yet, she thought, but soon. Margaret drove home in silence. Her apartment was on the north side of Hartfield, in a low-rise complex near the river. Small, clean, functional. No clutter, no photos on the walls, just books, a few plants, and a coffee maker that got more use than anything else in the kitchen. She dropped her keys on the counter, kicked off her shoes, and stood in the middle of the living room for a long moment, just breathing. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hi, Ms. Hale. This is Jamal. I was in the parking lot today. I sent you the video, just wanted to make sure you're okay." Margaret stared at the message. She typed back, "I'm okay. Thank you for recording." 3 dots appeared. Then, "That cop was way out of line. You want me to post it?" Margaret's fingers paused over the keyboard. She thought about it. Then she typed, "Not yet. I'll let you know." "Okay. Let me know if you need anything." Margaret set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights were starting to flicker on, one by one, like stars waking up. She thought about Dutch, about Ortiz, about the younger officer who'd noticed something in her wallet, and she thought about the part of her life she'd buried a long time ago. Not because she was ashamed of it, but because most people didn't need to know. Margaret had joined the army at 19, not out of patriotism exactly, though she respected the flag well enough. Not out of desperation either. She'd had options. College was on the table. Her parents had wanted her to study teaching, but Margaret had wanted something else. She'd wanted to matter. The recruiter had promised structure, purpose, a chance to serve. What he hadn't mentioned was the chaos, the noise, the fear that lived in your chest like a second heartbeat. She'd trained as a combat medic and deployed 3 times, twice to the Middle East, once to East Africa. 12 years in total. She'd stitched wounds under mortar fire, held dying soldiers while they called for their mothers, and learned how to keep moving when everything in her wanted to stop. She'd earned commendations, respect, a rank most medics never saw. And then she'd walked away. Not because she was broken, not because she couldn't handle it, but because she'd given enough. When she'd come home, she'd gone to nursing school, passed her boards, and found work at Crestview. It was quieter, safer. And for a long time, that had been enough. But the instincts didn't go away. The training didn't fade. And when Officer Ryan Dutch had put her in cuffs, something in her had clicked back into place. Not anger, clarity. The next morning, Margaret went to work. She didn't call in sick, didn't take a personal day. She just showed up, clocked in, and started her shift like nothing had happened. But people knew. The video hadn't gone public yet, but word had spread through the hospital like wildfire. By the time Margaret reached the nurses' station, half the staff was staring. A younger nurse, Kelly, approached cautiously. "Margaret, are you okay?" "I'm fine." "We saw what happened. That cop." "I'm fine," Margaret repeated, a little firmer this time. Kelly hesitated, then nodded and backed off. Margaret pulled up her patient list and got to work. But throughout the morning, she felt eyes on her. Whispers in the break room. A doctor she barely knew stopped her in the hallway to ask if she needed anything. She deflected them all. At lunch, she sat alone in the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich she wasn't hungry for, when her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. She answered. "Hello? Ms. Hale?" The voice was male, crisp, professional. "Speaking. This is Captain Jeff Riordan with the Hartfield Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. I'd like to schedule a time to speak with you regarding yesterday's incident." Margaret set down her sandwich. "Go ahead." "I'd prefer to do this in person." "Why?" A pause. "Because there are aspects of the incident that require clarification, and I think it would be in everyone's best interest to address them formally." Margaret's expression didn't change. "I'll come by tomorrow." "Thank you. Does 2 o'clock work?" "Yes." "See you then." The line went dead. Margaret sat there for a moment, staring at her phone. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled back to Lieutenant Colonel Sam Bridger's name. This time she didn't hesitate. She hit call. It rang twice. "Hale?" A rough voice answered, surprised but warm. "I'll be damned." "Hey, Sam." "It's been what, 3 years?" "4. "Jesus. You okay?" Margaret exhaled slowly. "I need a favor." There was a pause. Then Bridger's tone shifted, still friendly, but sharper now, focused. "Talk to me." Margaret laid it out in under 5 minutes. The stop. The detention. The lack of cause. The video. Bridger listened without interrupting. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then, "You still got your DOD credentials?" "Yeah." "Active status?" "Technically, yes. Inactive Reserve Medical Command." "Good." Bridger's voice dropped lower. "Margaret, listen to me. This isn't just misconduct. If you were detained while holding federal medical credentials, that's a whole different ballgame. You file a formal complaint, this goes up the chain fast." "I know." "You sure you want to do that?" Margaret looked out the cafeteria window at the parking lot where it had all started. "Yeah," she said quietly, I'm sure." "All right. I'll make some calls. Sit tight." "Thanks, Sam." "Don't thank me yet." The line went dead. Margaret sat there for a moment, then stood, tossed her uneaten sandwich in the trash, and went back to work. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind running through scenarios. Depositions? Investigations? Lawyers? The media? Maybe, if it went public. She thought about Dutch. About the way he'd looked at her, like she was nothing. And she thought about the younger officer at the station who'd seen something in her wallet and gone pale. Because he'd recognized it. The credentials tucked behind her driver's license weren't just old military ID. They were active federal clearance, tied to a reserve medical command that still technically had jurisdiction over her, which meant Dutch hadn't just arrested a nurse. He'd detained a federal officer, and that changed everything. At 1:55 the next afternoon, Margaret walked into the Hartfield Police Department's Internal Affairs office. Captain Reardon was waiting. He was older than she'd expected, mid-50s, graying, with the kind of face that had seen a lot and believed very little. He stood when she entered and offered his hand. "Ms. Hale, thanks for coming." Margaret shook it. "Captain." He gestured to a chair. She sat. Reardon settled across from her, pulled out a digital recorder, and set it on the table. "I'm going to record this, if that's all right." "That's fine." He hit record. Interview with Margaret Hale, October 14th, 2 p.m., regarding incident report filed by Officer Ryan Dutch on October 12th. He looked up. "Ms. Hale, can you walk me through what happened?" Margaret did. Calmly, clearly, without embellishment. Reardon took notes, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back. "Did Officer Dutch explain the reason for the stop?" "He said suspicious activity." "Did he clarify what that meant?" "No." "Did you refuse any lawful orders?" "I asked questions. I didn't refuse." Reardon nodded slowly. "And you have video of the encounter?" "Yes." "Can I see it?" Margaret pulled out her phone, opened the file, and slid it across the table. Reardon watched in silence. When it ended, he sat back and exhaled slowly. "Ms. Hale, this is going to be a problem." "For who?" He looked at her. "For Officer Dutch." Margaret didn't respond. Reardon rubbed his jaw. "I'm going to be honest with you. This doesn't look good, and if you decide to file a formal complaint, it's going to get worse." "I'm filing," he nodded. "Then I need to ask, are you planning to involve outside counsel?" "Not yet." "Federal oversight?" Margaret met his eyes. "That depends on how seriously you take this." Reardon held her gaze for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and stopped the recorder. "Off the record?" he said quietly. "Go ahead." "Dutch has a file. 3 prior complaints. 2 for excessive force, 1 for unlawful detention. None of them stuck. But they're there." Margaret's expression didn't change. Reardon leaned forward. "If you escalate this, it won't just be him. It'll be the department, the union, the city. They'll fight it." "Let them." He studied her. "You military?" "Was." "Combat?" "Medic, 12 years." Reardon nodded slowly, like something had just clicked into place. "Then you know how this goes," he said. "Once it starts, it doesn't stop clean." "I'm not looking for clean," Margaret said quietly. "I'm looking for right." Reardon sat back, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up the recorder and turned it back on. "For the record," he said, "Ms. Hale is filing a formal complaint. I'll forward this to the review board by end of day." "Thank you," Margaret said. She stood, shook his hand again, and walked out. Outside, the October air was crisp and cool. Margaret stood on the steps of the station, her phone in her hand, and pulled up Jamal's contact. She typed, "You can post the video now." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "You sure?" "Yes." "Okay, I'll do it tonight." Margaret pocketed her phone and started walking. Behind her, somewhere inside the building, the gears were already starting to turn. And across town, in a downtown high-rise, a black SUV with federal plates pulled into an underground garage. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. One of them checked his phone, read a message, and nodded. "Hartfield PD," he said. "Detained one of ours." The other man's expression hardened. "When?" 2 days ago." "She file?" "This afternoon." The first man pocketed his phone. "Then we move." They walked toward the elevator. And somewhere in Hartfield, Officer Ryan Dutch had no idea his world was about to collapse. The video went live at 9:47 p.m. Jamal didn't add much commentary, just the raw footage, a timestamp, and a caption. "Nurse detained outside Crestview Medical for loading her own car. No charges. Watch till the end." Within an hour, it had 2,000 views. By midnight, 20,000. By morning, it was everywhere. Margaret woke to her phone vibrating nonstop on the nightstand. She'd silenced it before bed, but the screen kept lighting up, text after text, notification after notification, until the glow became impossible to ignore. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and checked. The video had 500,000 views. Local news outlets had picked it up. 3 different reporters had messaged her directly asking for comment. Someone had started a hashtag Justice for Margaret. She scrolled through the comments. This is disgusting. That cop needs to be fired immediately. She didn't do anything, and he cuffed her? I hope she sues the hell out of them. Margaret set the phone down and stared at the wall. She'd expected attention. She hadn't expected this. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call. The screen read, Vanessa. Margaret answered. Hey. Mom. Vanessa's voice was tight, strained. Have you seen it? Yeah. It's everywhere. I mean, everywhere. CNN just ran a segment. They're calling it police misconduct, potential civil rights violation. Mom, this is national. Margaret closed her eyes. I know. Are you okay? I'm fine. You don't sound fine. Nessa. No, seriously, this is huge. You need a lawyer, like yesterday. Margaret exhaled slowly. I'm handling it. Handling it how? I filed a formal complaint with Internal Affairs. I have the video. I know what I'm doing. There was a pause. Then Vanessa's voice dropped, quieter now. Mom, you know this is going to get ugly, right? I know. The department's going to come after you, the union. They're going to drag you through everything. Let them. Another pause. You sound like you did back when... Vanessa stopped herself. When what? Margaret asked gently. When you came back. After your last deployment, you had that same tone. Like you'd already decided something and nothing was going to change your mind. Margaret didn't respond. Vanessa sighed. Just be careful, okay? I will. I love you. Love you too. Margaret hung up and sat there in the dim light of her bedroom, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Then she got up, made coffee, and got ready for work. Crestview Medical Center was a different place that morning. Margaret walked through the main entrance at 6:45 a.m., the same as always, but the energy had shifted. People stared. Some nodded. A few looked away quickly, like they didn't want to get involved. At the nurse's station, Kelly was waiting. Margaret, she said, eyes wide. Oh my God, are you... I'm fine, Margaret said, cutting her off. She clipped on her badge and pulled up the patient schedule on the computer. Kelly hovered. Everyone's talking about it. The video. Did you see... I saw. It's insane, that cop just... Kelly. Margaret looked up, her voice calm but firm. I need to focus on work right now, okay? Kelly blinked, then nodded quickly. Yeah, okay, sorry. Margaret turned back to the screen. She had 6 patients this morning, 2 of them post-op. She needed to check vitals, administer meds, update charts, normal stuff, routine stuff. She could do routine. But 10 minutes into her shift, the hospital administrator showed up. Dr. Victor Calloway was a tall man in his early 60s, silver-haired and perpetually tanned, the kind of guy who spent more time in board meetings than hospital floors. He approached the nurse's station with his hands in his pockets, his expression carefully neutral. Margaret, he said, can I have a word? She looked up. I'm in the middle of rounds. It'll just take a minute. Margaret saved her work, stood, and followed him down the hall to a small office near administration. Calloway closed the door behind them. Sit, he said. She didn't. What's this about? Calloway sighed, leaning against the desk. I think you know. The video. Yes. Margaret waited. Calloway rubbed his jaw. Look, Margaret, I want to be clear. I think what happened to you was wrong, completely wrong. But this situation is complicated. How? We've already had 3 news crews show up this morning asking for interviews. The hospital's getting dragged into this whether we like it or not. I didn't drag anyone into anything, Margaret said evenly. I was doing my job, in our parking lot. I know, but now the optics are... He stopped, choosing his words carefully. We need to be strategic about how we handle this. Margaret's eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means I need you to take a few days off, paid leave, just until things settle down. No. Calloway blinked. Excuse me? I said no, I'm not taking leave. Margaret, I didn't do anything wrong, Victor. I'm not hiding. Calloway's expression hardened. This isn't about hiding. It's about protecting the hospital's reputation. From what? From the fact that one of your nurses got illegally detained? From becoming a media circus? Margaret stepped closer, her voice dropping low. If you put me on leave, it looks like I did something wrong. And I didn't. Calloway stared at her for a long moment. Then he exhaled, deflating slightly. Fine. But if this gets worse, it won't. If it does, he continued, we're going to have to revisit this conversation. Margaret nodded once. Understood. She turned and walked out. By lunchtime, the hospital was swarming. 2 news vans parked outside the main entrance. A reporter tried to stop Margaret in the hallway, microphone extended, but security escorted him out before he could ask a question. Margaret kept her head down and focused on her patients. But the tension was everywhere. In the break room, nurses whispered. In the hallways, doctors exchanged looks. Even the patients seemed to know something was going on. At 1:30, Margaret's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Hale, this is Agent Malik with the Department of Justice. We need to speak with you regarding your federal credentials and the October 12th incident. Can you meet today? Margaret stopped walking. She read the message again. Then she typed back, Where? The response came immediately. Federal Building downtown, 4 p.m. Ask for Agent Malik at security. Margaret pocketed her phone and finished her shift. The Federal Building was a sleek glass tower in the heart of downtown Hartfield, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces. Margaret walked through the main entrance at 3:55, passed through security, and gave her name. The guard made a call, nodded, and handed her a visitor badge. 6th floor, Agent Malik will meet you at the elevator. Margaret clipped on the badge and rode up. When the doors opened, a woman was waiting. Agent Malik was in her early 40s, black, with close-cropped hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She wore a dark suit and carried herself with the kind of confidence that didn't need to announce itself. Ms. Hale, she said, extending a hand. Thanks for coming. Margaret shook it. Agent. Malik gestured down the hall. This way. They walked in silence past a series of glass-walled offices until they reached a small conference room. Inside, a man in his 50s was already seated, white, graying, built like someone who'd spent time in the field. His nameplate read Agent Torrens. Ms. Hale, he said, standing. Tom Torrens, have a seat. Margaret sat. Malik closed the door and joined them at the table. Torrens folded his hands. I'll get straight to it. We're here because of your federal medical credentials. I figured. You're aware that while holding active reserve status, detaining you without proper cause constitutes a federal offense? I am now. Malik leaned forward slightly. Ms. Hale, we've reviewed the video. We've also pulled Officer Dutch's file. This isn't his first incident. So I've heard. Here's the situation, Torrens said. You have every right to pursue this through local channels. Internal affairs, civil court, whatever. But if you want, we can escalate this to a federal civil rights investigation. Margaret looked between them. What's the difference? Scope, Malik said. A local IA investigation looks at Dutch. A federal investigation looks at the department, patterns, policies, training, the whole system. And if we find violations, Torrens added, it's not just Dutch who goes down. It's everyone who enabled him. Margaret sat back, processing. What do you need from me? She asked. Your cooperation, Malik said. Full deposition, access to the video and any other evidence. Testimony if it goes that far. And if I say yes? Torrens' expression didn't change. Then this gets a lot bigger. Margaret thought about Dutch, about the look on his face when he'd grabbed her wrist, about the 3 prior complaints that had gone nowhere. She thought about Ortiz, scrambling to apologize, about Calloway, worried about optics, and she thought about the younger officer at the station who'd seen her credentials and gone pale. I'm in, she said. Malik nodded. We'll need you to come back tomorrow for a formal statement. What time? 9 a.m. I'll be here. Torrens stood, offering his hand again. Thank you, Ms. Hale. Margaret shook it. Just doing what's right. More people should, Malik said quietly. That night, Margaret sat alone in her apartment and watched the news. The story had gone national, just like Vanessa said. CNN, MSNBC, Fox, all running segments. Some framed it as police misconduct, others as government overreach. A few tried to dig into Margaret's background, but there wasn't much to find. She'd kept her life quiet, intentionally. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sam Bridger. Saw the news. Feds involved now? Margaret typed back, yeah, meeting tomorrow. Good. They'll handle it, right? You doing okay? Yeah. Liar. Margaret smiled faintly. I'm fine, Sam. Call me if you need anything. I will. She set the phone down and stared at the TV. On screen, a legal analyst was breaking down the case. If the Department of Justice moves forward with a civil rights investigation, this could set a major precedent. We're talking systemic accountability, not just individual discipline. Margaret turned it off. She didn't need a precedent. She just needed the truth to come out. The next morning, Margaret gave her deposition. It took 3 hours. Malik and Torrens asked every question imaginable: background, timeline, Dutch's behavior, her response, the video, her credentials, her military service. They were thorough, professional, and they didn't miss anything. When it was over, Malik walked her to the elevator. How long until you know something? Margaret asked. Couple weeks, maybe. We have to review everything, coordinate with local IA, run background checks. And Dutch? Malik's expression hardened slightly. He's suspended pending investigation. Not fired? Not yet. Union rules, but if we find what we think we're going to find. She trailed off. He won't be a cop much longer. Margaret nodded. Miss Hale, Malik said as the elevator doors opened. You did the right thing. Doesn't always feel like it. No, Malik agreed. But it is. Margaret stepped into the elevator and rode down alone. 2 days later, the first cracks started to show. Dutch's lawyer released a statement claiming the video was taken out of context and that Margaret had been uncooperative. The police union issued a press release defending Dutch's actions and accusing the media of rushing to judgment. Margaret ignored it, but the hospital didn't. Calloway called her into his office again. Margaret, he said, looking tired, we've got a problem. What now? The union's threatening to picket the hospital. They're saying we're complicit in a smear campaign against Officer Dutch. Margaret stared at him. You're kidding. I wish I was. So what do you want me to do? Calloway hesitated. I want you to consider a public statement, something neutral, just de-escalate. Margaret's jaw tightened. No. Margaret, I'm not backing down, Victor. If the union wants to picket, let them. But I'm not apologizing for telling the truth. Calloway rubbed his temples. This is going to get worse before it gets better. I know. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sighed. All right, but if they show up here, security's going to have to handle it. Fine. Margaret left his office and went back to work. The picket line appeared 3 days later. About 20 officers, off-duty, in civilian clothes but carrying signs. Support our officers. Stop the witch hunt. Blue Lives Matter. They lined up outside the hospital's main entrance, chanting slogans and handing out flyers. Margaret saw them when she arrived for her shift. She walked right past them, head up, expression neutral. One of the officers stepped forward. You should be ashamed. Margaret didn't respond. Another voice called out, You're destroying a good man's career. She kept walking. Inside, the hospital was tense. Staff avoided the windows. Patients asked questions. Security kept watch. Margaret clocked in and went to work. But halfway through her shift, Kelly pulled her aside. Margaret, she whispered, someone just posted your address online. Margaret's stomach dropped. What? On some pro-cop forum, they're saying people should pay you a visit. Margaret's hands stilled. Show me. Kelly pulled out her phone and brought up the post. It was exactly what she'd said. Margaret's home address, her car's license plate, even a photo of her apartment building. And underneath, a comment. Let's see how brave she is when we show up. Margaret handed the phone back, her mind racing. You need to call the police, Kelly said. I'm not calling them. Margaret, I'll handle it. She pulled out her own phone and texted Agent Malik. They posted my address, threatening to show up. The response came in under a minute. Send me the link. We'll handle it. Margaret forwarded the forum post and pocketed her phone. Then she went back to work. That night, Margaret didn't go home. She packed a bag, checked into a budget motel on the edge of town, and paid cash. She didn't tell anyone where she was. Not Vanessa, not Sam, not the hospital. She just disappeared. The room was small, dated, with a rattling AC unit and a bedspread that had seen better days. But it was anonymous, and right now, that was all that mattered. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her phone. 17 missed calls from reporters, 5 from Vanessa, 1 from Malik. She ignored all of them except Malik's. The agent picked up immediately. Hale, where are you? Somewhere safe. Good. We traced the post. It came from a burner account, but we're working on it. Any threats to the hospital? Not yet, but we've coordinated with local PD to increase patrols around Crestview. Margaret exhaled. Thanks. Hale, Malik said, her voice softer now. You don't have to do this alone. We can arrange protection if you need it. I'm fine. You sure? Yeah. There was a pause. All right, but if that changes, I'll call. Margaret hung up and lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. She thought about the officers outside the hospital, the post, the threats, and she thought about Dutch, somewhere in the city, probably furious, probably scared. Good. The next morning, Margaret woke to her phone buzzing. Another text from Malik. We got something. Need you to come in. Now. Margaret sat up, adrenaline spiking. What is it? Not over text. Get here ASAP. Margaret threw on clothes, grabbed her bag, and drove straight to the federal building. Malik met her at the elevator again, but this time her expression was different, sharper, focused. What's going on? Margaret asked as they walked. We found a pattern, Malik said. Dutch has stopped 17 people in the last 2 years. 15 of them were women. 12 were over 50. 10 were minorities. Margaret's breath caught. And here's the kicker, Malik continued, pushing open the conference room door. None of them filed complaints. Most didn't even know they could. Inside, Torrens was waiting, a laptop open in front of him. Ms. Hale, he said, gesturing to the screen. We pulled body cam footage from Dutch's stops over the past 18 months. Take a look. Margaret sat down and watched. The first clip showed Dutch pulling over a black woman in her 60s for a broken taillight. He kept her on the side of the road for 40 minutes, demanding ID, registration, insurance. When she asked why, he threatened to impound her car. The second clip was worse. An Asian woman in her 50s stopped for suspicious driving. Dutch searched her vehicle without consent, found nothing, and let her go without explanation. The third was a Latina nurse, late 40s, stopped outside a grocery store for loitering. Margaret watched in silence, her jaw tight. When the last clip ended, Torrens closed the laptop. This is a pattern, he said, and it's documented. Margaret looked up. What happens now? We present this to the review board, Malik said, along with your case, and we push for federal charges, civil rights violations, abuse of authority, possibly conspiracy if we find out his supervisors knew and did nothing. How long? 2 weeks? Maybe 3. Margaret nodded slowly. But there's something else, Torrens said. We need you to testify, publicly. Margaret's stomach dropped. In court? Not yet. At a press conference. We want to announce the investigation and put Dutch's pattern on the record, if you're willing. Margaret sat back, processing. A press conference meant cameras, national media, her face everywhere. It meant there was no going back. She looked at Malik, then at Torrens. Then she thought about the women in those videos, the ones who didn't know they could fight back. When? She asked. Friday, Malik said. 3 days. Margaret exhaled slowly. I'll do it. The press conference was held in the federal building's main atrium, a vast open space with floor-to-ceiling windows and marble floors. By the time Margaret arrived, the room was packed. Cameras, reporters, microphones everywhere. Malik met her at the door. You ready? Margaret nodded, even though her hands were shaking. Just stick to the statement we prepped, Malik said. Don't answer questions you're not comfortable with. And remember, you're not on trial. He is. Margaret took a deep breath. Okay. They walked to the podium together. Torrens spoke first, laying out the investigation. The pattern. The evidence. The federal charges they were pursuing. Then he stepped aside. Ms. Margaret Hale will now make a brief statement. Margaret stepped up to the microphone, her heart pounding. The room went silent. She looked out at the sea of faces, the cameras, the lights, and she spoke. My name is Margaret Hale. I'm a registered nurse at Crestview Medical Center. On October 12th, I was detained by Officer Ryan Dutch while loading medical supplies into my car. I was not breaking any laws. I was not resisting. I was doing my job. Her voice was steady now, stronger. What happened to me was wrong, but I'm not here just for me. I'm here for every person who's been stopped, searched, detained, or humiliated without cause. For everyone who didn't know they could fight back. She paused. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. And it's long overdue. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Malik stepped forward, shielding Margaret from the chaos. That's all for now. Thank you. They escorted her out through a side door away from the crowd. Margaret's hands were still shaking, but when she looked at Malik, the agent was smiling. You did good, Malik said. Margaret exhaled. It's not over yet. No, Malik agreed, but it's starting to tip. That night, Margaret finally went home. She pulled into her apartment complex just after dark, half expecting to see protesters or worse. But the lot was empty. She parked, grabbed her bag, and walked to her door. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. Margaret dropped her keys on the counter, kicked off her shoes, and sat down on the couch. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. Saw the press conference. I'm proud of you, Mom. Margaret smiled faintly and typed back. Thanks, sweetheart. Another buzz. This time from Sam Bridger. You just declared war. You know that, right? Margaret stared at the message. Then she typed, Good. She set the phone down and closed her eyes. Outside, the city hummed. Somewhere Dutch was watching the news. Somewhere the Union was scrambling. Somewhere the Union was scrambling. Somewhere the system was starting to crack. And Margaret sat in the quiet of her apartment, waiting, because she knew what came next. The real fight hadn't even started yet. But when it did, she'd be ready. Her phone buzzed one more time. A call. Unknown number. Margaret answered. Hello? Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a voice. Low, male, angry. You're going to regret this. The line went dead. Margaret sat there, the phone still pressed to her ear, her heart hammering. Then she stood, walked to her door, and double-checked the lock. Margaret didn't sleep. She sat on her couch, with the lights off, watching the street through a gap in the curtains. Every car that passed made her pulse jump. Every footstep in the hallway outside her door pulled her attention away from the window. The voice on the phone played on loop in her head. You're going to regret this. She'd dealt with threats before. Deployments came with them, veiled, direct, whispered in languages she barely understood. But this felt different. This was home, her apartment, her city. At 2 a.m., she called Malik. The agent answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. Hale? I got a call, threatening. Malik's tone sharpened instantly. When? Hour ago. Unknown number. Male voice. Said I'd regret this. Did you record it? No. Damn. Okay. Stay where you are. I'm sending a patrol unit to your building. I don't want local cops. It's federal marshals, Malik cut in. They'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't open the door for anyone else. Margaret exhaled. All right. And Hale? Pack a bag. You're not staying there tonight. The line went dead. Margaret sat in the dark for another 10 minutes, then got up and started packing. Clothes, toiletries, her federal credentials, the silver lighter from her deployment days. She didn't know why, but she grabbed it anyway. By the time headlights swept across her window, she was ready. 2 knocks. Firm, professional. U.S. Marshals? Margaret checked the peephole. 2 men in dark jackets, badges visible. She opened the door. The older one, mid-40s with a squared-off jaw, nodded at her. Ms. Hale, I'm Deputy Marshal Greer. This is Deputy Reed. Agent Malik sent us. Come in, Margaret said, stepping aside. They did a quick sweep of the apartment, checking windows, closets, the small balcony. Reed, younger and wiry, paused at the front door. No security camera in the hallway? No, Margaret said. Building management? Useless. Reed exchanged a look with Greer. We're taking you to a secure location, Greer said. Grab your bag. Where? Safe house, federal property. You'll be there until we sort this out. Margaret hesitated. For how long? However long it takes. She grabbed her bag and followed them out. The safe house was a nondescript townhome in a suburb 20 minutes outside Hartfield. Brick exterior, small yard, nothing that stood out. Inside it was clean but sterile. Generic furniture, no personal touches, the kind of place designed to be forgotten. Greer did another sweep while Reed set up a communication protocol with Margaret. Emergency numbers. Check-in times. What to do if she saw anything suspicious. You'll have a marshal on site at all times, Reed said. Rotating shifts. If you need to leave, you clear it with us first. Margaret nodded, too tired to argue. Greer reappeared from the back hallway. All clear. We'll be outside if you need anything. They left her alone. Margaret dropped her bag on the couch and looked around. The windows had blackout curtains. The front door had 3 locks. There was a landline on the kitchen counter, no cell signal booster, which meant her phone would be spotty. She sat down and stared at the wall. This wasn't deployment. This wasn't a combat zone. But it sure as hell felt like one. Morning came with a knock on the door. Margaret hadn't slept. She'd dozed for maybe an hour around 4 a.m., then given up and made coffee. She opened the door to find a different marshal, a woman this time, late 30s with sharp features and no-nonsense energy. Her badge read Kowalski. Morning, Kowalski said. Shift change. Greer's out front if you need him. Agent Malik's on her way. When? 30 minutes. Margaret stepped aside to let her in. Kowalski did a quick visual check of the space, then settled near the window with a clear view of the street. Margaret went back to the kitchen and poured herself another cup of coffee. Her phone buzzed. Text from Vanessa. Where are you? I've been calling. Margaret typed back. Safe. Can't say where. I'll explain later. 3 dots appeared. Then, Mom, this is getting scary. I know. I'm okay. Marshals are with me. Marshals? What the hell is happening? Margaret stared at the screen, trying to figure out how to explain without making it worse. Before she could respond, another text came through. Just, please be careful. I can't lose you. Margaret's throat tightened. She typed, You won't, I promise. She set the phone down and finished her coffee in silence. Malik arrived at 9:15 with Torrens in tow. They came inside and Kowalski stepped out to give them privacy. Malik didn't waste time. We traced the call. Came from a burner, no surprise, but we pulled cell tower data and narrowed it down to a 3-block radius in South Hartfield. Near the precinct, Margaret asked. Close enough, Torrens said. We're working on subpoenaing phone records from officers who live in that area, but it'll take a few days. Margaret set her mug down. You think it was Dutch? We think it was someone connected to him, Malik said. Could be a friend, a union rep, another officer. We don't know yet. But you're looking. We're looking. Torrens pulled out a folder and set it on the counter. In the meantime, we've got an update on the investigation. The review board met yesterday. They're moving forward with formal charges against Dutch, civil rights violations, abuse of authority, and falsifying reports. Margaret's pulse kicked. Falsifying. We found discrepancies in 3 of his incident reports, Torrens said. Details that didn't match body cam footage. It's enough to add another charge. When does it go public? Monday, press release, formal indictment, the works. Margaret leaned back against the counter. He's going to lose it. Yeah, Malik said. He is, which is why you're staying here. For how long? Until the indictment's official and we've got him in custody. Margaret's jaw tightened. You're arresting him? Federal marshals will pick him up Monday morning, Torrens said. Clean, public, by the book. Margaret nodded slowly, processing. There's one more thing, Malik said, her tone shifting. We want you to testify at the grand jury hearing. Margaret looked up sharply. When? 2 weeks. It's not a trial, just a preliminary hearing to determine if there's enough evidence to move forward. But your testimony would seal it. And if I say no? We'd still move forward, Torrens said, but it'd be weaker. Dutch's lawyer would tear into the video, claim bias, try to discredit the other victims. Your testimony puts a face to the pattern. It makes it real. Margaret was quiet for a moment, then she said, I'll do it. Malik exhaled, visibly relieved. Thank you. But I want something in return, Margaret added. Torrens raised an eyebrow. What? I want to know who made the call. When you find out, I want to know. Malik and Torrens exchanged a glance. We'll see what we can do, Malik said carefully. Margaret's expression didn't change. That's not good enough. Hales, you're asking me to put my life on hold, testify in front of a grand jury, and keep walking around with a target on my back. The least you can do is keep me in the loop. Torrens was quiet for a beat. Then he nodded. All right. When we know, you'll know. Thank you. Malik stood. We'll check in tomorrow. In the meantime, stay inside. Don't contact anyone outside your immediate family. And if anything feels off, anything, you call us immediately. Margaret walked them to the door. As they left, Kowalski stepped back inside and took up her post by the window. Margaret sat down on the couch and stared at the ceiling. 2 weeks until the hearing. She could do 2 weeks. The days blurred together. Margaret spent most of her time in the safe house reading, pacing, or watching the news. The press conference had kicked off a firestorm. Dutch's face was everywhere, his record dissected on cable news, his union issuing statements that grew increasingly desperate. Crestview Medical called twice. Calloway wanted her to come in for a meeting, but Malik shut it down. Not until after the hearing, she said. Vanessa called every day. Margaret kept the conversation short, reassuring, vague. She couldn't tell her daughter where she was or how long she'd be there, and the not knowing was eating Vanessa alive. I just want to see you, Vanessa said on the 4th day, her voice cracking. Soon, Margaret promised. I'll come to Portland as soon as this is over. You swear? I swear. On the 6th day, Malik showed up unannounced. Margaret opened the door to find the agent standing there with a grim expression. What happened? Margaret asked immediately. Malik stepped inside. We found the caller. Margaret's breath caught. Who? Officer named Travis Delmont. Works out of the same precinct as Dutch. They've been friends for 8 years. Margaret's hands curled into fists. Are you arresting him? Already did. Picked him up this morning. He's in federal custody. Margaret exhaled slowly, some of the tension draining out of her shoulders. But there's a complication, Malik continued. Margaret's stomach dropped. What kind? Delmont's claiming he was acting on his own. No coordination with Dutch, no conspiracy, just a buddy trying to scare you into backing off. You believe that? No, but without proof, it's his word against the circumstantial evidence. Margaret's jaw tightened. So he gets a slap on the wrist and Dutch walks? Dutch isn't walking, Malik said firmly. The charges against him are solid, but if we can't connect Delmont's threat to a broader conspiracy, it stays a separate case. That's not good enough. I know. Malik paused. But it's where we are. Margaret turned away, staring out the window at the quiet street. We're still digging, Malik said. Phone records, texts, emails. If there's a connection, we'll find it. Margaret didn't respond. Malik stayed for a few more minutes, then left. Margaret sat back down on the couch and tried to slow her breathing. She'd known this wouldn't be clean. She'd known the system would fight back. But knowing it and living it were two different things. On the 10th day, Margaret's phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Hello? Ms. Hale. A woman's voice, soft, uncertain. Yes. My name is Angela Simmons. I saw you on the news, the press conference. Margaret sat up. Okay. I was stopped by Officer Dutch 2 years ago, outside a grocery store. Angela's voice wavered. He searched my car, made me wait on the side of the road for over an hour. I didn't know I could fight it. I just let it happen. Margaret's chest tightened. I'm sorry that happened to you. I didn't call to ask for sympathy, Angela said, her voice steadying. I called because I want to help. If you're testifying, I want to testify too. Margaret closed her eyes. Angela, this is going to be hard. They'll dig into your life, question everything. I don't care. I'm done being quiet. Margaret was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Hold on." She pulled the phone away and texted Malik. "Got another witness. Victim from 2 years ago. She wants to testify." The response came in seconds. "Get her contact info. I'll call her today." Margaret went back to the call. "Angela, I'm going to give you a number. An agent with the DOJ. She'll walk you through what happens next." "Okay." Margaret rattled off Malik's number. "Her name is Agent Malik. Tell her I referred you." "Thank you," Angela said, her voice thick. "Thank you for doing this." "Thank you for calling." Margaret hung up and sat there staring at her phone. She wasn't alone anymore. That's it. By the 12th day, 3 more women had called. All of them had been stopped by Dutch. All of them had the same story. Detained without cause, searched without consent, humiliated and sent on their way. Malik set up interviews with each of them. "This is bigger than we thought," Malik said over the phone. "If even half of these cases hold up, we're looking at systemic abuse." "What does that mean for the hearing?" Margaret asked. "It means we're not just going after Dutch. We're going after the culture that let him operate unchecked for years." Margaret felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The night before the grand jury hearing, Margaret couldn't sit still. She paced the safe house, running through her testimony in her head. Malik had prepped her for hours. What to say, what not to say, how to handle hostile questions. "Just tell the truth," Malik had said. "That's all you need to do." But the truth felt heavier now. It wasn't just her story anymore. It was Angela's, and the 3 other women, and every person Dutch had stopped and humiliated over the years. Margaret's phone buzzed. A text from Sam Bridger. "You ready for tomorrow?" Margaret typed back. "As ready as I'll ever be. You're going to do fine. Just remember, you've faced worse." Margaret smiled faintly. "Thanks, Sam. Call me after. I want to hear how it goes." "I will." She set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet. Kowalski sat in an unmarked car at the curb, keeping watch. Margaret stood there for a long time, staring out at the dark. Tomorrow, she'd walk into a federal courthouse and tell her story in front of a grand jury. Tomorrow, the system would decide if Dutch's career was over. Tomorrow, everything changed. She just had to make it through the night. At 3 a.m., the sound of breaking glass shattered the silence. Margaret jolted awake, heart hammering. Another crash, louder this time from the back of the house. She rolled off the couch and crouched low, instincts kicking in. Outside, Kowalski's voice crackled through the radio Margaret kept on the coffee table. "Hale, stay down. We've got movement in the back. Do not engage." Margaret grabbed the radio. "Copy." Footsteps, heavy, multiple. Her pulse spiked. The back door rattled, someone testing the locks. Then a voice, muffled but audible. "She's in there. Break it." Margaret's blood went cold. A loud crash, the door splintering. Kowalski's voice again, sharp and urgent. "Back up en route. 60 seconds. Stay down." Margaret didn't have 60 seconds. She heard them inside now, boots on hardwood, moving fast. Her mind raced. No weapon. No exit. Just her and whoever had just broken in. The living room door flew open. A man stepped through, tall, broad, face covered by a ski mask. He saw her. Margaret didn't move. "Get up," he said, his voice low and controlled. She stayed crouched. "I said, get up." Behind him, another figure appeared. Then a third. Margaret's heart slammed against her ribs. The first man took a step closer. "You should have kept your mouth shut." And then the front door exploded inward. Kowalski came through first, weapon drawn, shouting commands. "Federal marshals, on the ground, now!" The 3 men froze. For a split second, no one moved. Then all hell broke loose. The first man lunged toward Margaret. Kowalski fired, a sharp crack that echoed through the room. The man went down, clutching his shoulder, screaming. The other 2 bolted for the back door. More marshals poured in from the front. Greer, Reed, 2 others Margaret didn't recognize. "Secure the exits," Greer shouted. Margaret pressed herself against the wall, breathing hard, adrenaline flooding her system. It was over in less than a minute. All 3 men were on the ground, cuffed, bleeding, or stunned. Kowalski appeared at Margaret's side, breathing hard. "You hurt?" Margaret shook her head, unable to speak. Greer was already on his radio, calling for an ambulance and additional units. Margaret's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, back against the wall, and stared at the chaos unfolding around her. Kowalski crouched beside her. "Hey, look at me. You're okay. You're safe." Margaret nodded, but her hands were shaking. Greer walked over, his expression grim. "We need to move you. Now." "Where?" Margaret managed. "Somewhere they can't find." Margaret looked at the three men on the floor. One of them was still conscious, glaring at her through the pain. She met his eyes and didn't look away. "Who sent you?" she asked quietly. He spat blood onto the floor and said nothing. Greer pulled Margaret to her feet. "Let's go." They led her out into the cold night air where two more marshal vehicles were pulling up, lights flashing. Margaret climbed into the back of one, Kowalski beside her. As they pulled away, Margaret looked back at the safe house. The front door hung open, splintered and broken, and somewhere in the city, someone had just tried to kill her. Greer's voice came through the radio. "Malik, we've got a situation. Safe house was breached, 3 suspects in custody, Hale's secure, but we need a new location. Now." Malik's response was immediate. "Take her to the federal courthouse. We'll hold her there until morning." Margaret closed her eyes and leaned back against the seat. Tomorrow, she'd testify. Tonight, she'd almost died. And whoever had sent those men was still out there. The federal courthouse was a fortress at night. Margaret sat in a windowless holding room on the 3rd floor, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her. Her hands had stopped shaking, but the adrenaline hadn't fully left her system. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ski mask, heard the voice. "You should have kept your mouth shut." Kowalski sat across from her, silent and watchful. The door opened and Malik walked in, followed by Torrens. Both looked like they'd been pulled out of bed, wrinkled clothes, disheveled hair, but their expressions were sharp. "You all right?" Malik asked, sitting down beside Margaret. "Yeah." "You're lying," Margaret exhaled. "I'm functional. That good enough?" Malik didn't smile. "For now." Torrens leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "We've got all 3 men in custody. None of them are talking yet, but we pulled prints and IDs. 2 of them have priors, assault, unlawful entry. The 3rd is clean on paper, but his phone's a gold mine." Margaret looked up. "What's on it?" "Texts. Dozens of them. Coordinating the breach, discussing your location, even photos of the safe house from the outside." Torrens paused. "And they all trace back to a single contact. No name, just a number." "Let me guess," Margaret said quietly. "Burner." "Yeah, but we're tracing the tower pings. Whoever gave the order was in Hartfield when they sent those messages." Malik leaned forward. "Margaret, this wasn't random. Someone with access to law enforcement resources found out where you were and sent those men to scare you, or worse." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Dutch? We don't know that yet." "Who else would it be?" Torrens pushed off the wall. "Dutch is in custody. Has been since this morning. We picked him up at 6 a.m. as planned. He's been in a holding cell all day." Margaret frowned. "Then how—" "He could have set it up before we arrested him," Malik said. "Or someone else is involved. Either way, this just became attempted murder on top of everything else." Margaret sat back, processing. "The hearing's still happening," Torrens said. 4 hours from now. You still up for it?" Margaret didn't hesitate. "Yes?" Malik studied her. "You sure? After what just happened? I'm sure." Kowalski spoke up from the corner. "She should rest. At least a couple hours." Malik nodded. "Agreed. We've got a secure room upstairs. You can sleep there until it's time." Margaret stood. "I'm not going to sleep." "Then lie down and stare at the ceiling," Malik said. "Either way, you need to conserve energy. It's going to be a long day." Margaret didn't argue. The room upstairs was small but clean, a cot, a chair, a single lamp. Greer stood outside the door. No windows. No way in except past him. Margaret lay down on the cot and stared at the ceiling like Malik had said. Her mind wouldn't stop. She thought about the 3 men, about the phone with the texts, about Dutch sitting in a cell somewhere, probably furious, probably scared. And she thought about the grand jury waiting for her in a few hours. She must have dozed off at some point because the next thing she knew, Kowalski was shaking her shoulder. "It's time." Margaret sat up, disoriented. The room was still dark. She checked her watch, 7:30 a.m. Hearings at 9, Kowalski said. Malik wants you ready by 8. Margaret nodded and followed her out. The grand jury room was smaller than Margaret had expected. 23 jurors sat in tiered rows, watching as she entered. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane Russo, stood at a lectern near the front. Malik and Torrens sat off to the side, observing. Margaret took the witness chair. Russo approached with a calm, measured expression. Ms. Hale, thank you for being here. I know this hasn't been easy. Margaret nodded. I'm going to walk you through the events of October 12th. Just answer as clearly and honestly as you can. If you need a break at any point, let me know. Okay, Russo started with the basics. What Margaret had been doing, where she'd been, what time Dutch had approached her. Margaret answered each question methodically, keeping her voice steady. Then Russo moved to the encounter itself. When Officer Dutch asked for your ID, how did you respond? I asked why he needed it. And what did he say? He said I was engaging in suspicious activity. Did he specify what that activity was? No. Did you refuse to comply? No, I gave him my license. Russo nodded. What happened next? Margaret walked them through it. The demand to step away from the car, the escalation, the cuffs. One of the jurors, an older man in the back row, leaned forward. Did he ever tell you why you were being detained? Margaret looked at him. He said I was being difficult. That's not a legal reason, the man said. No, Margaret agreed. It's not. Russo let the silence hang for a moment, then continued. She pulled up the video on a screen at the front of the room. The jurors watched in silence. When it ended, Russo turned back to Margaret. Ms. Hale, you mentioned in your statement that you hold federal medical credentials. Can you explain what that means? I served as a combat medic in the U.S. Army for 12 years. When I transitioned to civilian life, I retained inactive reserve status with a federal medical command. That status is still active. And you had those credentials on you the day you were detained? Yes. In my wallet. Russo turned to the jurors. What Ms. Hale is describing is a federally recognized position. Detaining her without cause isn't just misconduct. It's a violation of federal authority. One of the jurors, a younger woman, raised her hand. Did Officer Dutch know about your credentials? Not at the time, Margaret said, but the officers at the station saw them when they processed my belongings. And what happened after that? They released me immediately. The woman nodded, her expression tight. Russo spent the next 20 minutes going through the pattern of Dutch's stops, the body cam footage, the other victims, the falsified reports. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Ms. Hale, Russo said, is there anything else you'd like the jury to know? Margaret thought for a moment. Then she said, I didn't come forward because I wanted to destroy someone's career. I came forward because what happened to me has happened to too many other people, and it needs to stop. Russo nodded. Thank you. Margaret stepped down. As she walked past the jurors, one of them, a black woman in her 50s, caught her eye and gave her a small nod. Margaret nodded back. Outside the grand jury room, Malik was waiting. You did good, she said. How long until they decide? Could be a few hours. Could be a few days. Margaret leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. Torrens appeared from down the hall, phone in hand. We got something. Malik straightened. What? The burner phone that coordinated the safe house breach? We traced the tower pings. Whoever used it was at the Hartfield precinct when the texts were sent. Margaret's pulse kicked. Inside the building? Yeah. So it's a cop. Or someone with access to the building, Torrens said. We're pulling security footage now. Malik's expression hardened. If this ties back to Dutch, it will, Margaret said quietly. Malik looked at her. You sound sure. I am. 3 hours later, Torrens called. Margaret was in a conference room with Malik, drinking bad coffee and trying not to think about the men who'd broken into the safe house. Torrens walked in and set his laptop on the table. You need to see this. He pulled up security footage from the Hartfield precinct, time-stamped 2 days before the breach. The camera showed the main hallway. Officers coming and going, nothing unusual. Then a figure appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, face angled away from the camera. He stopped near a row of lockers, pulled out a phone, and started typing. Torrens froze the frame and zoomed in. The timestamp matched the text sent to the men who'd attacked the safe house. "Who's that?" Malik asked. Torrens enhanced the image, focusing on a name patch visible on the man's uniform. Delmont. Margaret's stomach dropped. "Travis Delmont," Torrens said. "The officer who made the threatening call to you. He's been in federal custody since we arrested him 6 days ago." "Then how?" Malik started. "He wasn't working alone," Torrens said. "We cross-referenced his phone records with Dutch's. They've been in contact constantly for the past 2 weeks. Calls, texts, encrypted messaging apps. And 3 days before the breach, Dutch visited Delmont at the federal detention center." Malik's jaw tightened. "What did they talk about?" "Attorney-client privilege. The visit was logged as a legal consultation." "Bullshit," Margaret said. Torrens nodded. "We think so too. But we can't prove it unless one of them talks." "They won't," Malik said. "Maybe not," Torrens agreed. "But the 3 men we arrested at the safe house might. Well, by evening, one of them did. His name was Curtis Hale, no relation to Margaret. He was 32, unemployed, and facing 20 years for attempted murder. His lawyer cut a deal. Full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Malik and Torrens brought Margaret into an observation room to watch the interrogation. Curtis sat across from Russo, hands cuffed, eyes darting nervously. "Tell me how this started," Russo said. Curtis exhaled. "Delmont reached out, said he had a job. Cash payment, no questions." "What was the job?" "Scare someone. Make them think twice about testifying." "Who?" Curtis hesitated. "You're already facing federal charges," Russo said calmly. "Lying now just makes it worse." Curtis looked down. "The nurse. Margaret Hale." "And who hired Delmont?" "I don't know." "You don't know or you won't say?" "I don't know. Delmont never said, just told us where to go and what to do." Russo leaned forward. "Did he mention Officer Ryan Dutch?" Curtis's eyes flicked up. "Not by name, but he said it was for a friend. A cop who was getting screwed over." Russo sat back. "That's all I need." Shit. The grand jury returned their decision the next morning. Indictment on all charges, civil rights violations, abuse of authority, falsifying reports, conspiracy. Dutch's bail was revoked. He'd stay in federal custody until trial. Margaret got the news from Malik over the phone. "It's done," Malik said. "He's not getting out." Margaret sat down on the edge of the cot in the courthouse holding room. "What about Delmont?" "Same. Conspiracy, witness intimidation, attempted murder. He's looking at 30 years minimum." Margaret closed her eyes. "You okay?" Malik asked. "Yeah." "You don't sound okay." Margaret exhaled. I didn't think it would feel like this." "Like what?" "Empty." Malik was quiet for a moment. "It's not empty. It's relief. You're just too tired to feel it yet." Margaret nodded, even though Malik couldn't see her. "Get some rest," Malik said. "We'll talk tomorrow." The line went dead. Margaret sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. Then she called Vanessa. Her daughter picked up immediately. "Mom?" "Hey, sweetheart. Are you okay? I saw the news about the attack. I'm fine. I'm safe." Vanessa's voice cracked. "You could have died." "But I didn't. That's not good enough." Margaret's throat tightened. "I know. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just come home, please." "I will, soon." "When?" "As soon as they let me." Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm proud of you, Mom. I'm terrified, but I'm proud." Margaret's eyes burned. "Thank you. I love you." "Love you too." She hung up and sat in the silence. 2 days later, Margaret was cleared to leave federal protection. The marshals drove her back to her apartment. Greer walked her to the door and did a final sweep of the place. "All clear," he said. "But we'll have a unit nearby for the next few weeks, just in case." Thank you, Margaret said. Greer handed her a card with a direct number. Anything feels off, you call. She nodded. When he left, Margaret locked the door and stood in the middle of her living room. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. She walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot. It was quiet, normal, like nothing had ever happened. That night, Margaret got a call from Crestview. It was Calloway. Margaret, he said, his tone careful, I wanted to check in, see how you're doing. I'm fine. Good. That's good. He paused. Listen, I know things have been complicated, but the board and I have been talking and we'd like you to come back. Margaret frowned. I never said I was leaving. I know. But after everything that's happened, we thought you might want some time, paid leave, full benefits, however long you need. I don't need time, Victor. I need to work. Calloway hesitated. Are you sure? The media's still camped outside. It's going to be a circus for a while. I've dealt with worse. Another pause. All right. When do you want to start? Monday? Monday, Calloway repeated. Okay, we'll make it work. Margaret hung up and stared at her phone. She'd won. The charges had stuck. Dutch was in custody, Delmont too, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion. On Sunday, Margaret went for a walk. She hadn't left her apartment since she'd gotten back, and the walls were starting to close in. She needed air, space, something normal. She drove to a park near the river, parked, and started walking along the trail. It was late afternoon, the sun low and golden. A few joggers passed, a couple with a dog, an older man feeding ducks by the water. Margaret found a bench and sat down. For the first time in weeks, she let herself just exist. No marshals, no lawyers, no cameras, just her and the quiet. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her messages. One from Angela Simmons, the woman who'd called to testify. Thank you for everything. You changed my life. One from Sam Bridger. Heard the news. Proud of you, Hale. Let's grab a drink when you're up for it. One from Jamal, the kid who'd filmed the video. You're a legend. Seriously. Margaret smiled faintly. Then her phone buzzed with a new message. Unknown number. Her pulse spiked. She opened it. You should have listened. Margaret's blood went cold. Another message came through. This isn't over. Her hands shook. She looked around the park, the joggers, the couple, the old man. No one was looking at her, but someone was watching. She stood, pocketed her phone, and started walking quickly back to her car. Halfway there, another text. Turn around. Margaret stopped. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Slowly, she turned. A man stood about 50 feet away, partially hidden by a tree. Tall, broad-shouldered. He stepped into the light. It was Dutch. Margaret's breath caught. He started walking toward her. She pulled out her phone, hands trembling, and dialed Malik. It went to voicemail. Dutch was closer now, 20 feet. Margaret backed up, her mind racing. He shouldn't be out. He was supposed to be in custody. Surprised? Dutch said, his voice calm. Margaret didn't respond. Bail got posted this morning. Wasn't easy, but I've got friends. Margaret's pulse roared in her ears. You think you won, Dutch continued, stopping about 10 feet away. You think you destroyed me. You destroyed yourself. Dutch's expression darkened. I was doing my job. Your job isn't to harass people. My job is to keep the city safe, and people like you, he took a step closer, you make that harder. Margaret's hand tightened on her phone. You're going to drop the charges, Dutch said. No. You don't have a choice. Yes, I do. Dutch smiled, cold, sharp. You really think you're untouchable now? You think the feds can protect you forever? I think you're out on bail for about 5 more minutes, Margaret said, her voice steadier than she felt. Because I'm calling them the second you walk away. Dutch's smile faded. You're done, Margaret said quietly. You just don't know it yet. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Dutch stepped back. This isn't over. Yes, Margaret said. It is. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away. Margaret stood there, shaking until he disappeared from view. Then she called Malik. This time, the agent picked up. "Hale? Dutch is out. He just approached me in a public park. Threatened me." "What?" "He's out on bail. That's impossible." His bail was revoked. Margaret's stomach dropped. "Then how—" "Stay where you are. I'm sending units now." Margaret looked around the park. Dutch was gone, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left. She stood there, alone, as the sun sank below the horizon. And somewhere in the city, Ryan Dutch was smiling. Malik arrived with 4 agents and 2 Hartfield PD units in under 10 minutes. Margaret stood by her car, arms crossed, watching the park fill with flashing lights. Joggers had stopped to stare. The old man with the ducks had vanished. The quiet she'd come here for was gone. Malik walked straight to her. "You okay?" "Yeah." "Where'd he go?" Margaret pointed toward the tree line on the far side of the park. "That way, 5 minutes ago." Malik turned to one of the agents. "Fan out. Check the perimeter. I want eyes on every exit." They scattered. Torrens appeared from one of the cars, phone pressed to his ear. He looked furious. When he hung up, he walked over to Margaret and Malik. "Dutch was never released," he said flatly. "His bail hearing isn't until Wednesday. Someone forged the paperwork." Margaret's stomach dropped. "How's that possible?" "We're looking into it, but whoever did this had access to federal detention records and court documents." "Another cop?" Margaret said. Torrens didn't deny it. Malik's jaw tightened. "This is bigger than we thought." "No," Margaret said quietly. "It's exactly what we thought. We just didn't want to admit it." Malik looked at her. "This isn't one bad cop," Margaret continued. "It's a network. People protecting each other, covering tracks. And they're not going to stop until someone forces them to." Torrens exhaled. "Then we force them." By midnight, Dutch still hadn't been found. Margaret sat in an interrogation room at the federal building, not because she was in trouble, but because it was the safest place for her. Marshals were stationed outside. Malik and Torrens were in the next room, coordinating the search. Margaret stared at the table, running through everything in her head. Dutch shouldn't have known where she was. The park wasn't near her apartment. She hadn't told anyone she was going, which meant someone was tracking her. She pulled out her phone and checked it. No unfamiliar apps, no location sharing turned on. Then she remembered. The hospital badge. She'd been wearing it the day Dutch stopped her, and she'd worn it every day since, even after everything that happened. Margaret pulled the badge off her scrubs and turned it over. There, on the back, was a tiny black chip she'd never noticed before. Her blood went cold. She stood and walked to the door, opening it to find Kowalski standing guard. "Get Malik," Margaret said. "Now." Malik took one look at the badge and swore. "It's a GPS tracker," she said, holding it up to the light. "Embedded in the laminate, probably activated remotely." "How long has it been there?" Margaret asked. "No way to know without running diagnostics, but if I had to guess, since the day you were detained." Margaret's hands curled into fists. "Dutch, or someone working with him," Torrens said, walking into the room. "We'll get it to the lab, pull the data. If it's been logging your movements, we'll know everywhere you've been. And who's been watching?" Margaret sat down heavily. "He's been following me this whole time." "Not anymore," Malik said, dropping the badge into an evidence bag. "We'll sweep your car, your apartment, everything. If there are more, we'll find them." Margaret looked up. "And if you don't?" Malik didn't answer.
that.
The sweep took 3 hours. They found 2 more trackers, one inside Margaret's car, magnetically attached to the undercarriage, and another sewn into the lining of her nurse's bag. Margaret watched as the tech team pulled them out, cataloged them, bagged them. "Whoever did this had access to your vehicle and your personal belongings," the lead tech said. "Probably when you were at work." "The hospital parking lot," Margaret said quietly. Malik nodded. "We'll pull security footage, see if we can catch who planted them." "It won't be Dutch," Margaret said. "He's too smart for that." "Then it'll be someone working for him," Torrens said. "And when we find them, they'll talk." Margaret stood by the window watching the tech's work, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. Behind her, Malik was on the phone coordinating something. Torrance had disappeared down the hallway 20 minutes ago. She thought about this moment in the park when Dutch had smiled at her. That cold, sharp smile that said he thought he'd already won. He'd been so sure of himself, just like he'd been in the parking lot 6 months ago. Margaret's phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. "Mom, I'm seeing stuff on Twitter about Dutch being out. Please tell me you're somewhere safe." Margaret typed back quickly. "I'm at the federal building. Marshals everywhere. I'm fine." That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got right now. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "I'm coming down there." "No." "Mom, Vanessa, I need you to stay in Portland, please. I can't worry about you and deal with this at the same time." A long pause, then, "Fine. But you call me every day, twice a day. I will. Promise. I promise." Margaret pocketed her phone and turned around. Malik had finished her call and was watching her. "Your daughter?" Malik asked. "Yeah." "She worried?" "Terrified." Malik nodded. "Can't blame her." "No," Margaret agreed. "I can't." Torrance came back into the room carrying a laptop. His expression was tight, controlled, but Margaret could see something burning underneath. "We got him," Torrance said. Margaret's pulse kicked. "Dutch?" "No, the person who planted the trackers." He set the laptop down and pulled up security footage from the Crestview parking lot. The timestamp read October 14th, 2 days after Margaret's detention. The video showed a man in street clothes walking through the lot. He stopped at Margaret's car, crouched down near the rear wheel well, and stayed there for about 90 seconds. When he stood up, he looked around once, then walked away. Torrance froze the frame and zoomed in on the man's face. Margaret recognized him immediately. "Officer Keith Branson," Torrance said. "Works out of the same precinct as Dutch. They've been on the same shift rotation for 3 years." Margaret stared at the screen. "Where is he now?" "In custody. We picked him up 20 minutes ago. He's in an interrogation room downstairs." "Is he talking?" "Not yet, but he will." Malik crossed her arms. "His lawyer's already here, making noise about unlawful detention, lack of evidence, the usual." "We have him on camera planting a tracker," Margaret said. "And his lawyer's claiming he was doing routine vehicle maintenance for a friend," Malik said. "It's weak, but it's something." Margaret's jaw tightened. "So he walks?" "No," Torrance said, "because we've got more than just the video." He pulled up another file on the laptop, a series of text messages. "These are from Branson's phone," Torrance said. "We got a warrant an hour ago. He's been in contact with Dutch almost daily since your detention, and 3 days ago, Dutch sent him this." He highlighted one message. "She's at the park on Riverside. Silver sedan. Make sure she knows we're watching." Margaret's breath caught. "That's witness intimidation," Malik said. "Conspiracy. And it ties Dutch directly to Branson's actions." "There's more," Torrance said, scrolling down. 2 weeks ago, Branson texted someone else, a number we haven't identified yet, and the message said, "We need to move faster. She's not backing down." Margaret looked at the screen. "Who did he send that to?" "We're working on it, but whoever it is, they're connected to this." Malik's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, then answered. "Malik." She listened for a moment, her expression hardening. "You're sure?" she said. "All right, we're on our way." She hung up and looked at Margaret. They found Dutch. Dutch had been hiding in a motel on the outskirts of Hartfield, 40 minutes from the city. By the time Margaret, Malik, and Torrance arrived, the place was surrounded. Federal agents, local PD. SWAT in position near the door. Dutch's room was on the second floor, at the far end of the building. Malik parked and turned to Margaret. "You stay in the car." "I want to see this." "Margaret, I'm not getting out. I'm not interfering. I just want to see it." Malik hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but you don't move." Margaret watched from the car as Malik and Torrance walked toward the motel, flanked by agents. A voice came over a loudspeaker. "Ryan Dutch, this is the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Nothing. The voice repeated the command. Still nothing. Malik signaled to the SWAT team. They moved into position, breaching equipment ready. Then the door opened. Dutch stepped out, hands raised, his face pale and drawn. He looked smaller than Margaret remembered, less sure of himself. Two agents moved in, cuffed him, and led him down the stairs. As they passed the car where Margaret sat, Dutch turned his head and looked directly at her. Margaret met his eyes and didn't blink. Dutch looked away first. They loaded him into a federal transport vehicle and drove away. Margaret sat in the car for a long moment, watching the taillights disappear. Malik walked over and opened the passenger door. "You all right?" "Yeah." "We got him. For real this time." Margaret nodded. "What happens now?" "Now? We build the case. Branson's already talking. We'll get statements from the other officers involved, pull financials, communication records, everything. By the time this goes to trial, we'll have them buried." "How long?" "Few months, maybe. Depends on how fast the prosecutor moves." Margaret looked out at the motel. "He looks scared." "He should be," Malik said. "He's going away for a long time." Back at the federal building, Branson's lawyer cut a deal. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. It took less than an hour for Branson to start talking. Margaret sat in the observation room with Malik, watching through the one-way glass as Branson laid it all out. The trackers, the coordinated harassment, the messages, and the plan to escalate if Margaret didn't back down. "Dutch said we had to send a message," Branson said, his voice flat, "that people like her couldn't just go after cops and expect to get away with it." "People like her?" Russo asked. Branson hesitated. "People who think they're above the law." "Ms. Hale is a nurse," Russo said. "How is she above the law?" "She wasn't following orders. She questioned Dutch. Made him look bad." "So you retaliated?" Branson looked down. "Yeah." "On Dutch's orders?" "Yeah." "And the safe house attack? Was that on his orders too?" Branson hesitated again. "I don't know about that. Dutch never mentioned it to me." "But you knew it happened." "I heard about it, but I wasn't involved." Russo leaned forward. "Keith, we have texts from your phone coordinating with the men who attacked Ms. Hale. You want to revise that statement?" Branson's face went pale. "I didn't send those." "Then who did?" "I don't know. Someone must have had access to my phone." Russo sat back, unimpressed. "You're going to need a better story than that." In the observation room, Margaret turned to Malik. "He's lying." "Yeah," Malik said, "but he's scared. Give Russo time. She'll break him." Margaret watched as Russo pressed harder, picking apart Branson's story piece by piece. Finally, Branson cracked. All right, he said, hands up. "It wasn't just Dutch. There were others." "Who?" Branson looked at the table. "Delmont and a sergeant, guy named Howell. He's the one who coordinated the safe house thing. Dutch knew about it, but Howell made the calls." Margaret's stomach dropped. Malik was already on her phone. "Get me everything on Sergeant Marcus Howell. Now." Within 20 minutes, they had a file on Howell. 15 years on the force. 2 commendations. 1 prior complaint for excessive force that had been dismissed, and a phone number that matched the unidentified contact in Branson's messages. "Son of a bitch," Torrens muttered, reading over Malik's shoulder. "He's been running this the whole time." "Not the whole time," Malik said. "Dutch started it, but Howell took it further." "Where is he now?" Margaret asked. Malik checked her phone. "On duty. Night shift at the precinct." "Pick him up," Torrens said. Malik made the call. Depart. Sergeant Marcus Howell was arrested at the precinct an hour later. He didn't resist. Didn't say a word. Just let the federal agents cuff him and lead him out while his fellow officers watched in stunned silence. By the time they brought him to the federal building, his lawyer was already there. A sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Morse, who looked like she could tear through steel with her stare. Howell sat in the interrogation room, arms crossed, expression blank. Russo walked in with a file and set it on the table. "Sergeant Howell," she said, "thank you for coming." "Didn't have much choice." "No, you didn't." Russo sat down. "Let's make this simple. We have text messages linking you to the attack on Margaret Hale's safe house. We have phone records showing repeated contact with Officer Dutch and Officer Delmont. And we have testimony from Keith Branson placing you at the center of this conspiracy." Howell didn't react. "You can cooperate," Russo continued, "or you can go down with everyone else. Your choice." Howell leaned back in his chair. "I want to talk to my lawyer." Morse leaned forward. My client has nothing to say at this time. Rousseau nodded. That's fine, but you should know, we're charging him with conspiracy to commit assault, witness intimidation, and obstruction of justice. And if Ms. Hale had been killed in that attack, we'd be adding murder conspiracy to the list. Howell's expression finally cracked. Just a flicker, but Margaret saw it from the observation room. Fear. Morse put a hand on Howell's arm. Don't say anything. But Howell was already talking. I didn't order them to hurt her. I just told them to scare her. Morse closed her eyes. Marcus, I'm not going down for attempted murder, Howell said, his voice rising. That wasn't the plan. Then what was the plan? Rousseau asked. Howell looked at her. To make her back off. That's it. Dutch said she was going to ruin everything, that she'd bring the whole department down if someone didn't stop her. So you tried to stop her. I tried to make her see reason. By sending men to attack her. Howell's jaw tightened. They weren't supposed to hurt her, just scare her enough to drop the case. Rousseau sat back. That's conspiracy, Sergeant. And it doesn't matter what you intended. What matters is what happened. Howell looked down at the table. Morse leaned in and whispered something to him. He shook his head. Then he looked at Rousseau. What kind of deal are we talking about? Howell's cooperation opened the floodgates. He gave them names, dates, communications, a complete breakdown of how the network had operated. It turned out Dutch hadn't been working alone from the beginning. There were 5 other officers involved, some actively participating, others just looking the other way. By the end of the week, all of them had been arrested. The Hartfield Police Department was in freefall. The chief resigned. The union issued a statement condemning the officers' actions while trying to distance itself from the scandal. Protests erupted outside the precinct, with activists demanding systemic reform, and Margaret went back to work. The hospital felt different now. People still stared, but the energy had shifted. There was respect in the looks now. And something else. Curiosity, maybe. Like they were trying to figure out who she really was. Margaret didn't care. She clocked in, checked her patient list, and got to work. Halfway through her shift, Kelly approached her at the nurse's station. Margaret, can I ask you something? Margaret looked up from the chart she was updating. Sure. How did you do it? How did you keep going when everything was falling apart? Margaret set down her pen and looked at Kelly. Really looked at her. Kelly was young, mid-20s maybe, fresh out of nursing school. Still idealistic enough to think the system worked the way it was supposed to. I didn't have a choice, Margaret said. Yes, you did. You could have dropped the charges, walked away, let it go. No, Margaret said quietly. I couldn't. Kelly frowned. Why not? Margaret thought about it for a moment. Because if I'd walked away, she said, it would have sent a message. That it's okay to abuse power. That people like me don't matter, and I couldn't live with that. Kelly nodded slowly. You're braver than I am. No, Margaret said. I'm just tired of being invisible. Kelly smiled faintly. You're not invisible anymore. Margaret went back to her chart. No, I guess I'm not. 3 weeks before the trial, Angela Simmons called again. Margaret, I need to tell you something. Margaret set down her coffee. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, it's just, I've been thinking about testifying. You don't have to, Margaret said quickly. I know it's hard. No, I want to, Angela interrupted. I need to, but I'm scared. Margaret sat down. Scared of what? Of them, the union, Dutch's lawyer, what they'll say about me. They'll say whatever they can to discredit you, Margaret said honestly. That's how this works. I know. But what if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing and it ruins the case? Margaret exhaled. Angela, listen to me. You're not going to ruin anything. You're going to tell the truth. That's all you have to do. And the truth is stronger than anything they can throw at you. Angela was quiet for a moment. You really believe that? I have to, Margaret said. Otherwise, none of this matters. Angela's voice steadied. Okay, I'll do it. Good. Margaret? Yeah? Thank you for giving me the courage. Margaret's throat tightened. You always had it. You just needed a reason to use it. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 more women came forward. All of them had been stopped by Dutch or one of the other officers. All of them had similar stories: detained without cause, searched without consent, humiliated and sent on their way. Malik coordinated interviews with each of them, built profiles, gathered evidence. By the time the trial date arrived, the prosecution had a mountain of testimony ready. Margaret met with each of the women individually. She listened to their stories, answered their questions, helped them prepare. One of them, a woman named Lisa Rodriguez, broke down crying halfway through their meeting. "I thought I was the only one," Lisa said, wiping her eyes. "I thought it was my fault, that I'd done something wrong." Margaret handed her a tissue. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Then why did he treat me like that?" "Because he could," Margaret said quietly. "Because the system let him, and because no one had stopped him yet." Lisa looked up. "But you did." "We did," Margaret corrected. "All of us. Together." Lisa nodded, taking a shaky breath. "I'm glad I'm doing this." "Me too." The trial began on a cold Monday in November. The courthouse was packed. Media lined the steps outside. Inside, every seat in the gallery was filled. Margaret sat in the front row with Malik and Torrens, watching as Dutch and the other 5 officers were led into the courtroom in handcuffs. Dutch looked thinner, older. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped. He didn't look at Margaret. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Callahan, entered last. "All rise." Everyone stood. The trial lasted 14 days. The prosecution presented the video from the parking lot, the body cam footage of Dutch's other stops, the testimony of Angela, Lisa, and the other women who'd come forward, Branson's cooperation, Howell's confession, the text messages, the trackers, the recordings. The defense fought hard. Dutch's lawyer, Mitchell Vance, painted him as a dedicated officer caught in a system that rewarded aggression and punished hesitation. "Officer Dutch was doing his job," Vance said during his opening statement. "He was trying to keep the city safe, and now he's being crucified for it by people who've never walked a day in his shoes." But the evidence didn't lie. Margaret took the stand on the 6th day. Russo walked her through the events of October 12th one more time, slowly and methodically. Margaret answered every question calmly, her voice steady. When Vance's turn came, he went for the throat. "Ms. Hale, isn't it true that you have a history of defying authority?" "I have a history of questioning unlawful orders," Margaret said. "That sounds like defiance to me." "It's accountability." Vance's expression hardened. "You served in the military. You understand chain of command. And yet you expect this jury to believe you were cooperative with Officer Dutch?" "I was cooperative. I gave him my license. I answered his questions. I didn't resist when he detained me." "But you questioned him." "Yes." "Why?" "Because he didn't have a legal reason to stop me." "And you, a nurse, felt qualified to make that determination?" Margaret looked directly at the jury. "I felt qualified to ask for one." The courtroom went silent. Vance tried a few more angles, but Margaret didn't flinch. When he asked if she had any bias against law enforcement, Margaret paused. "I don't have a bias against law enforcement," she said carefully. "I have a problem with people who abuse their power. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Most officers do their jobs with integrity, but when one doesn't, and the system protects him anyway, that's when it becomes everyone's problem." Vance opened his mouth to respond, but Judge Callahan cut him off. "Move on, counselor." When Russo stood for redirect, she asked only one question. "Ms. Hale, do you regret filing this complaint?" Margaret looked at Dutch, sitting at the defense table with his head down. "No," she said. "I don't." "Even after everything you've been through? The threats, the attack, the media scrutiny?" "Especially after all that. Because it proved something." "What did it prove?" "That the system only works when people refuse to be silent." The courtroom was completely still. Russo sat down. Margaret stepped off the stand and walked back to her seat. As she passed Dutch, he looked up. Their eyes met for just a second. Margaret saw something in his expression, not anger, not defiance, resignation. She kept walking. Angela Simmons testified on the 8th day. She was nervous at first, her hands shaking as she took the oath. But once she started talking, her voice grew stronger. She told the jury about being stopped outside a grocery store. about Dutch searching her car without explanation, about standing on the side of the road for over an hour while he went through her belongings. "Did you feel you could leave?" Russo asked. "No," Angela said. "He had my license, and he kept saying he'd impound my car if I didn't cooperate." "Did he ever tell you why he stopped you?" "No, just that I looked suspicious." "What were you wearing?" "Scrubs. I was coming from work." "And what did you do when he finally let you go?" Angela's voice wavered. "I went home and cried." The gallery was silent. Vance's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned Angela's memory, her timeline, her motives for coming forward. But Angela held her ground. "I'm here," she said, looking directly at Vance, "because what happened to me was wrong, and I'm not going to pretend it wasn't just to make your client look better." Vance sat down. Angela stepped off the stand with her head high. Lisa Rodriguez testified on the 10th day, then 2 more women on the 11th and 12th days. Each of their stories echoed the others. Different locations, different dates, but the same pattern. By the time the prosecution rested, the case was airtight. Vance called character witnesses for Dutch, fellow officers who testified that he was dedicated, professional, a good cop. But under cross-examination, Russo dismantled them one by one. "Did you ever witness Officer Dutch make a stop without probable cause?" I don't recall." "Did you ever see him search a vehicle without consent?" "That's not something I would have been present for." "But you're testifying to his character. How can you speak to his character if you've never witnessed how he conducts himself during stops?" The witness had no answer. On the 13th day, Vance called Dutch to the stand. It was a risk, and everyone knew it. Dutch took the oath, sat down, and looked out at the courtroom. Vance walked him through his career, his commendations, his years of service. Then he asked about October 12th. "Why did you stop Ms. Hale?" Dutch exhaled. "I saw her loading equipment into her car. It looked unusual." "Unusual how?" "The equipment, medical supplies. I thought she might have taken them from the hospital." "And did you find any evidence of theft?" "No." "So you released her?" "Yes." Russo stood for cross-examination. She didn't waste time. "Officer Dutch, in your 15 years on the force, how many people have you stopped for suspicious activity?" Dutch hesitated. "I don't know the exact number." "More than 50? "Probably." "More than 100? "Maybe." "And how many of those stops resulted in arrests?" Dutch shifted in his seat. "I'd have to check the records." "I already did," Russo said. "Out of 147 stops for suspicious activity in the last 5 years, only 12 resulted in arrests. That's less than 10%. Dutch didn't respond. "So what you're telling this jury," Russo continued, "is that 90% of the time, you stopped people who weren't doing anything wrong." "I was doing my job." "Your job is to detain innocent people?" "My job is to investigate. Without probable cause. I had reasonable suspicion." "Based on what?" "The color of their skin, their age, the fact that they questioned you?" Vance stood. "Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness." "Sustained," Judge Callahan said. "Ms. Russo, rephrase." Russo stepped closer. "Officer Dutch, of the 147 people you stopped, how many were women?" Dutch hesitated. "I don't know." 112. How many were over the age of 50? "I don't." 93. How many were minorities? Dutch looked down. 86, Russo said. "Does that sound like random chance to you?" "I stop people based on behavior, not demographics." "Then explain why your stops disproportionately targeted women, minorities, and older individuals." Dutch had no answer. Russo let the silence sit. Then she said, "No further questions." The jury deliberated for 4 days. Margaret spent that time trying to keep herself busy. She went to work, cleaned her apartment, called Vanessa every night. "How are you holding up?" her daughter asked on the 3rd night. "I'm okay." "Liar." Margaret smiled faintly. "I'm nervous." "That's normal." "I know, I need this to be over." "It will be. Soon." On the afternoon of the 4th day, Malik called. "Jury's back. Margaret's heart slammed against her ribs. Already? Verdicts in 30 minutes. Margaret hung up, grabbed her coat, and drove to the courthouse. The gallery was packed again. Margaret sat in her usual spot, hands folded, trying to control her breathing. Dutch and the other officers were brought in. Dutch looked straight ahead, his face unreadable. Judge Callahan entered. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman, a middle-aged man in a button-down shirt, stood. "We have, Your Honor." "Please read it." "On the charge of civil rights violations against Ryan Dutch, we find the defendant guilty." Margaret's breath caught. "On the charge of abuse of authority, we find the defendant guilty." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. "On the charge of falsifying reports, we find the defendant guilty." Dutch's shoulders slumped. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit assault, we find the defendant guilty." Someone in the back of the courtroom gasped. "On the charge of witness intimidation, we find the defendant guilty." Judge Callahan turned to the foreman. "And the other defendants?" The foreman read through the verdicts for Delmont, Branson, Howell, Mills, and the fifth officer, a man named Patterson. Guilty on all counts, every single one. The courtroom erupted. Judge Callahan banged her gavel. "Order! I will have order in this courtroom." The noise died down. Callahan turned to Dutch. "Mr. Dutch, you have been found guilty on all charges. Sentencing will be scheduled for 4 weeks from today. Until then, you will remain in federal custody." She looked at the other defendants. "The same applies to all of you." The marshals stood. Dutch rose slowly, hands cuffed, his face pale. As they led him past Margaret, he stopped. He looked at her, not with anger, not with defiance, just defeat. Margaret met his eyes and didn't look away. Then he was gone. But outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Margaret stood at the top of the steps, Malik beside her, and faced the cameras. "Ms. Hale, how do you feel about the verdict?" Margaret took a breath. "I feel like justice was done. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been stopped, detained, or humiliated without cause. This case was never about one officer. It was about a system that allowed abuse to happen unchecked. And today, that system was held accountable." "What do you say to people who think you went too far?" Margaret's expression hardened. "I'd say they've never been handcuffed for doing nothing wrong. I'd say they've never had their life threatened for speaking up. And I'd say they need to think about what kind of world they want to live in." "What's next for you?" "I'm going back to work. I'm going to keep doing my job. And I'm going to keep fighting for people who don't have a voice." "Do you have any message for Officer Dutch?" Margaret looked directly at the camera. "I hope he understands what he did. I hope he learns from it. And I hope the people who enabled him learn too. Because this can't happen again." She turned and walked away. The sentencing came 4 weeks later. Dutch received 22 years in federal prison, no parole eligibility for 15. Delmont got 25, Howell got 18. Branson, because of his cooperation, got 7. Mills got 5. Patterson got 12. The Hartfield Police Department underwent a complete federal overhaul. The chief was replaced. New policies were implemented. Training was overhauled. Civilian oversight boards were established. Body cameras became mandatory, and a federal monitor was installed to ensure compliance. And Margaret Hale became a name people knew. Yet, 6 months after the trial, Calloway called Margaret into his office. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, gesturing to a chair. Margaret sat. "What's up?" "The hospital board has been discussing ways to prevent incidents like yours from happening again. Not just here, but system-wide." "Okay. We're creating a new position, patient advocacy and community liaison. Someone who works with law enforcement, handles complaints, develops policy, trains staff on de-escalation and civil rights." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Sounds ambitious." "It is. And we want you to lead it." Margaret blinked. "What?" "You'd still work as a nurse part-time if you wanted, but the majority of your role would be advocacy. Working with patients who've been mistreated, coordinating with external agencies, building bridges." Margaret stared at him. "Victor, I'm not qualified for that." "You're the most qualified person I know," Calloway said. "You stood up to a corrupt system and won. You've been through the worst of it and came out the other side. If anyone can make this work, it's you." Margaret looked down, processing. You don't have to answer now, Calloway said. Take a few days. Think about it. Margaret nodded. I will. That night she sat on her balcony with a cup of tea, staring out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. Heard about the job offer. You gonna take it? Margaret smiled and typed back, I don't know yet. Mom, you literally just spent the last year fighting for accountability. This is your chance to actually build something. I know. So what's stopping you? Margaret thought about it. I'm tired, Nessa. I've been fighting for so long. Part of me just wants to go back to being a nurse. You can do both. Can I? Yes, you can, and you should. Margaret stared at the screen. You really think I can do this? I know you can. The question is, do you? Margaret set the phone down and looked out at the city. She thought about the women who'd called her. Angela, Lisa, the others, the people who'd found their voices because she'd used hers. She thought about the system that had tried to crush her and failed. And she thought about the kind of world she wanted to live in. A world where people weren't invisible, where power was checked, where accountability mattered. She picked up her phone and texted Vanessa back. Yeah, I think I do. 3 months later, Margaret stood in front of a crowd at a community center in downtown Hartfield. The room was packed with nurses, activists, former victims of police misconduct, and people who'd followed her story from the beginning. She'd been invited to speak about resilience, accountability, and what it meant to fight back when the system failed. Margaret stood at the podium, looking out at the faces staring back at her. She thought about the parking lot, the handcuffs, the threats, the trial, and she thought about the moment she decided to stop being silent. She cleared her throat and began, A year ago, I was just a nurse. I wasn't anyone special. I wasn't trying to change the world. I was loading medical supplies into my car after a long shift. She paused. And then I was stopped, detained, handcuffed, for doing nothing wrong. The room was silent. I could have stayed quiet. A lot of people told me to. They said it wasn't worth the fight, that I'd lose, that the system would crush me. She looked out at the crowd. But I didn't stay quiet. And I didn't lose. She leaned forward slightly. Because I learned something that I want to share with all of you. She paused. Power doesn't come from a badge or a title. It comes from knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take it from you. Applause rippled through the room. Margaret continued, The system is built to make you feel small, to make you think you don't matter, that your voice doesn't count. And if you let it, it will silence you. She met the eyes of a young woman in the front row who was staring at her intently. But you are not powerless. You are not invisible, and your voice matters. The applause grew louder. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this. Don't wait for permission to speak up. Don't wait for someone else to fight for you. Because the system doesn't change on its own. It changes when people like us refuse to accept it the way it is. The crowd stood, clapping, some wiping their eyes. Margaret smiled and stepped away from the podium. People rushed forward to shake her hand, to thank her, to share their own stories. One woman, older, with graying hair and kind eyes, gripped Margaret's hand tightly. You saved my daughter, she said, her voice thick. She was stopped by one of those officers 2 years ago. She never told anyone because she thought no one would believe her. But when she saw you on the news, she finally spoke up. Margaret's throat tightened. Is she okay? She's testifying next month. Because of you. Margaret squeezed her hand. She's doing it because she's brave, not because of me. The woman shook her head. You showed her it was possible. That night, Margaret drove home in silence, the woman's words echoing in her head. When she got to her apartment, she sat on the couch and stared at the wall for a long time. Her phone buzzed, a text from Sam Bridger. Saw your speech online. You're a hell of a speaker. When'd you get so good at that? Margaret smiled and typed back, I'm not good at it. I'm just honest. Same thing. Another buzz. This time from Malik. Heard you accepted Calloway's offer. Congratulations. Thanks. You're going to be great at it. We'll see. I don't have to see. I already know. Margaret set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the city stretched out below her, lights flickering like stars. She thought about the woman at the community center, about her daughter finding the courage to speak up. And she thought about all the people still out there who didn't know they could. Margaret pulled out her laptop and opened a blank document. She'd been thinking about writing something, a guide maybe, or a manual, something that people could use when they didn't know where to start. She titled it, "When the System Fails You, A Guide to Fighting Back." And then she started typing. Damn. 6 months later, Margaret's guide had been downloaded over 100,000 times. It had been shared by advocacy groups, civil rights organizations, and legal aid clinics across the country. People sent her messages every day, thanking her, asking questions, sharing their own stories. Margaret answered as many as she could. Her new role at the hospital had taken off. She'd trained over 400 staff members on de-escalation and civil rights. She'd worked with 12 patients who'd filed complaints against law enforcement. She'd coordinated with community organizations to build trust between hospitals and the neighborhoods they served. It was exhausting, but it mattered. One afternoon, Margaret was in her office when her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Ms. Hale?" A woman's voice, young, uncertain. "Yes." "My name is Jasmine. I was stopped by a cop last week. He searched my car without asking, kept me there for an hour. I didn't know what to do." Margaret leaned back in her chair. "Did you file a complaint?" "I didn't think it would matter." "It does. But how do I even start?" Margaret smiled. "I'll walk you through it." She spent the next 45 minutes on the phone with Jasmine, explaining the process, answering questions, offering reassurance. When they hung up, Margaret sat in silence for a moment. Then she opened her email and started drafting a follow-up message to send Jasmine with resources, contact information, and next steps. This was the work now. Not dramatic, not flashy, just showing up. One person at a time. And that, Margaret realized, was exactly where she was supposed to be. A year and a half after the trial, Margaret received a letter. It was postmarked from a federal prison in Pennsylvania. She stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single handwritten page. "Ms. Hale, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to care. But I needed to write it anyway. I was wrong. About you. About what I did. About everything. I told myself I was just doing my job. That you were the problem. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of being questioned. Scared of losing control. And I took that fear out on you. I know that doesn't make it okay. Nothing I say will. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. What I did. What I was part of. And I'm sorry. I don't know if you believe in second chances. I'm not sure I do. But I hope the people who come after me learn from my mistakes." Ryan Dutch. Margaret read the letter twice. Then she folded it, put it back in the envelope, and filed it away. She didn't respond. Some things didn't need a response, but she kept it, because it was proof that even the people who tried to break her had, in the end, been broken themselves. Not by her. By the truth. 2 years after the trial, Margaret stood in the parking lot of Crestview Medical Center, loading supplies into her car. It was late afternoon. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the asphalt. She closed the trunk and stood there for a moment, looking around. This was where it had started, right here, a white-haired nurse, invisible, overlooked, until she wasn't. Margaret got into her car and drove home. When she arrived, Vanessa was waiting on her doorstep. Margaret blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" Vanessa grinned. "Surprise!" Margaret laughed and pulled her into a hug. "You didn't tell me you were coming." "That's what makes it a surprise, Mom." They went inside, and Margaret made tea while Vanessa told her about Portland, her kids, her job. "So," Vanessa said eventually, "how's the advocacy work going?" "Good. Busy. But good." "You happy?" Margaret thought about it. "Yeah, I am." "Good. You deserve to be." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping tea, just being together. Eventually, Vanessa spoke again. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever regret it? Fighting back?" Margaret looked at her daughter. "No." "Even with everything you went through?" especially because of everything I went through. Vanessa nodded slowly. I'm proud of you, you know. Margaret's throat tightened. Thank you. I mean it. You're the strongest person I know. Margaret shook her head. I'm not strong, Nessa. I'm just stubborn. Vanessa laughed. Same thing, Sam. That night, after Vanessa had gone to bed in the guest room, Margaret stood on her balcony one last time. The city stretched out below her, alive and breathing. She thought about everything that had happened, the parking lot, the handcuffs, the trial, the verdict. And she thought about the people she'd helped since. Jasmine, the woman at the community center, the dozens of others who'd reached out. She hadn't set out to change the world. She'd just refused to stay silent. And somehow, that had been enough. Margaret looked up at the sky, at the stars barely visible through the city's glow. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was someone who mattered, not because of a title or a position, but because she'd stood up when it would have been easier to stay down. And that, she realized, was the only kind of power that really mattered, the kind you gave yourself. Margaret took a deep breath, feeling something settle inside her. Peace, not because the fight was over, but because she knew now that she could handle whatever came next. She'd proven it, to the system, to Dutch, to the world, but most importantly, to herself. Margaret smiled and walked back inside, closing the door behind her. Tomorrow she'd get up and do it all over again. Because that's what you do when you refuse to be invisible. You show up, you speak up, and you don't stop, no matter what. The city hummed below her window, full of people going about their lives, unaware that a white-haired nurse had just changed the way the system worked. And that was fine. Margaret didn't need recognition. She just needed to know she'd done the right thing, and she had. She'd started as someone invisible, and now she was someone who couldn't be ignored. Not because she was loud, but because she was right. And sometimes that's all it takes to change everything.